Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Hope you're having a great Thanksgiving holiday. Well, among those giving thanks throughout Louisiana this weekend are some industries that might have received more in state incentives than makes economic sense. An investigative series beginning this Sunday will take a hard look, and we will have a sneak peek at it. We'll also look at the debate over suing oil companies and what the lawyers are getting out of the controversy. Our Future Watch segment examines mental health initiatives, and as is traditional for this weekend, we'll look at our own list of events from the past year for which to be thankful. At our table are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Kevin McGill, reporter, Associated Press. Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter, and Gordon Russell, managing editor for Investigations, the New Orleans Advocate. And first over to Gordon, and you at the Advocate, you're having a real extensive series start this Sunday, and we're taking a look at state tax incentives for industry, businesses, et cetera. What are you finding out?
Well, our series is called Giving Away Louisiana, and it's a look at these incentive programs that are meant to lure specific industries such as film and solar to the state, and then also some programs that are broadly geared to just draw any kind of business that's going to create jobs and so forth. And these are incentives. They're either breaks on your taxes, or in many cases they're actually grants or checks that the state is writing. They're called tax credits, but in many cases, if you don't have a tax liability, the state will write you a check. For instance, with the film tax credits, which have caused Louisiana to be one of the busiest locations for feature filming in the country, or the busiest. If the films generally don't have a tax liability, so the state gives them tax credits, sometimes millions of dollars in tax credits, and then they're able to turn those back over to the state and get a check for 85% of the amount. Some movies like Green Lantern, for instance, got $35 million worth of state aid, which is a pretty substantial sum.
Yeah, indeed it is.
How much is the state getting in return for the
That's
movie
the
being
question.
shot here?
Well, that's the big question, and that's one of the things we're looking at in this series. It depends, and the studies on the film, not all of these have been studied very well. The film industry, every 2 years, the state does a study trying to analyze how much we're getting, a return on our investment, and the state studies say that we're not getting a very good return on our investment at all. Now, the people in the film industry dispute this and feel like the methodology of the state studies is flawed. That's sort of an open question, but the economists the state has hired to do this says that we only get about 23 cents on the dollar for every state tax dollar we invest in the film industry. Some of these other programs are not really studied at all, what we're getting back.
So tell us the industries that you guys are specifically looking at in this series.
So we're looking at the film industry, we're looking at the solar panel installation industry, we're looking at fracking, which receives a very large exemption. It's a 2-year blanket exemption on severance taxes for wells that are drilled horizontally, which is what the technology that's used in fracking. We're looking at the business inventory tax, which is kind of an obscure tax that the state is giving away a lot of money in these rebates for that.
To industry, not to individuals.
Yeah. Generally, it can be like a mom and pop grocery store. The biggest payers of inventory tax are actually oil refineries, and they're getting that refunded by the state. We're looking at something called enterprise zones, which are these areas that poor areas essentially where the state is trying to encourage investment, but the state changed this enterprise zone program several years ago to where the zones didn't really matter anymore, and businesses can get these grants regardless of whether they're investing inside the zones. And then we're looking at these so-called mega projects, like large industrial projects that often get big state grant packages to build something like the Sazal project in Lake Charles is an example.
So how many tax incentives or tax breaks are out there? Yeah.
Well, there's about 450 that are in state law, specific exemptions, and then we're looking at just 6 programs here that are some of the major ones. The other thing I should mention about this that caused us to take a look at this is every year the state is short of money when the legislature meets, and there's always a scramble to balance the budget. And the one reason we think is that the cost of these incentives or these giveaways has really mushroomed from like $200 million a decade ago to over $1 billion now, which happens to be, usually they're fighting over several $100 million here and there. And this is kind of an uncounted money because it never actually comes into the Treasury.
Gordon, I thought that one reason that so many reality TV shows were set in Louisiana was because we had so many ornery characters out in the swamps. But it turns out that may be true. Right. But it turns out there's another reason too, and with this also.
Right. I mean, it's been a huge, huge reason to come here. And I think some people have built off of Louisiana, like Swamp People and Duck Dynasty and shows like that. But you have a lot of the movies that are made here that you would never know they're made here. Like G.I. Joe 2, for instance, you could go see that movie and you wouldn't know it was made in Louisiana, which, the supporters of this say is a sign of the maturity of our industry, that we're not just filming on location here, we have enough, but it's also a sign that these incentives are so powerful that they're bringing Hollywood here to make these movies, and the question is it worth it for us?
Well, they're pretty entrenched, too. I mean, there have been some efforts to remove some of these incentives, right?
Yeah, a couple of years ago, when Bobby Jindal had the notion of getting rid of the income tax, there was some talk about paring back some of these programs, but of course, that plan didn't go anywhere, and the talk of paring back the programs kind of went away with it. But I think this will be a big issue in the next governor's race, which is going to kind of start up this year. From what I'm hearing, the legislature probably won't do much about any of this year because it's the governor's last year in office and the legislators are all up for election, and it's kind of a lame duck year, and they probably will just kind of punt on all of this. There's a chance they'll take up the film tax credits. Mm-hmm. But I think this will be a fairly big issue for the governor's race, which is going to sort of get underway next year.
Which is tax reform too, right? Just it fits into overall tax reform.
There is, and there's also a big study being done that the legislature hired a couple of Tulane professors and an LSU economist to do a study of the state's tax structure, and that I think will play into all this too.
Yeah.
This reminds me sort of like the argument back when the Superdome was being built, and people would say, why build a dome stadium? Why don't we put the money into more hospitals and schools? And the argument is that we want a dome stadium, and then also that dome stadiums generate money that hospitals and schools don't. And so sometimes it's just something that people want, versus the cost.
Well, I think that's true, and I think the film program is really popular, and I've been finding in my reporting on this that everybody I talk to, most of the people I talk to who aren't in the industry, they love this program. I mean, they see Brad Pitt here, and they see Angelina Jolie, and they see all these...
And the local jobs it has created.
Oh, it
the sound stages and the technicians, and the makeup people who work here end up working in Hollywood South, too.
Yeah, exactly, but it's not like people have done some detailed analysis of it. They just see these... It's exciting, It's much more exciting than fracking or something like that, or an oil refinery. Not that I'm saying those are the only other kinds of jobs we could have, but people find it exciting that big movies are being made here, big stars are in New Orleans, they're talking about it, and they know people who work in the industry, or they know people who might have rented their house out as a set, and so that becomes... Now, in other parts of the state, I don't think you see any of this. If you're in, Alexandria, I don't think there's a lot of signs of Hollywood there. But they're all paying for it, just like we are.
Well, we will be looking for this. It starts this Sunday in the New Orleans Advocate. And how many parts in this series?
It's an 8-part series, so it'll run Sunday through Sunday.
So we're going to learn a lot. Yeah. Okay, Gordon, thanks a lot. Kevin, over to you now. And the big oil lawsuit, such as it's called, and the lawyers involved. You've written something about that and the hours that are mounting up, lawyer hours.
This is a lawsuit that seems to have 9 lives. It was filed in the summer of 2013. Immediately, the governor came out against it. The head of his coastal protection agency, who's now running for Congress, came out against it. Obviously, the industry was against it, and a lot of people in the legislature were against it. The governor set about trying to replace members on the board that filed it. He's not been completely successful with that. The state has passed a law to kill it, but that's being challenged in court. Meanwhile, there's the incentive for the board to rescind the lawsuit, no matter how much political pressure is brought on them, it grows smaller every day because the cost of the lawsuit grows bigger every day. And there was what is often referred to as the poison pill included in the contract, and that was the board hired attorneys. They hired them on a contingency basis. If the attorneys win the case for the board potentially gets hundreds of millions, maybe billions and billions of dollars to fight coastal erosion and protect New Orleans. If they lose the lawsuit, they get nothing. However, if the board, because of a clause in the contract, if the board decides to pull back on the lawsuit, to rescind the lawsuit, then the board is responsible for paying the lawyers. So obviously the longer the lawsuit lasts, the more the lawyers work and the more expensive it becomes for the board to kill the lawsuit. Gladstone Jones, who's a lead attorney for the board, was at a gathering sponsored by the Lens about a week ago. He was asked about the mounting costs. There's $2 million in expenses so far. Plus, he said he estimated billable hours at about 15,000. The rates for those billable hours can range anywhere from 200 to 800, but the math, it's easily going to be $5 to $10 million if the board were to kill the lawsuit now.
So, but the lawyers are working on contingency, and so their fee would be, if the authority would win the lawsuit, the fee for the attorneys would be what?
It depends. There's a sliding scale, but it could be anywhere depending on how much they get, from 22% to 32% of these hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. And they've been working from the very beginning. It's a very complex lawsuit, and there's gathering research on the various areas that they say have been damaged by the oil and gas companies and the drilling and the dredging. Then there's the added cost of fighting the state's law aimed at killing the lawsuit. That in state court, one judge has already said, agreed with the board's attorneys that the law was badly drafted, for one thing, and doesn't do what it's supposed to do. Even if it did, this same judge says it's unconstitutional. It violates the state's constitution's separation of powers. Essentially, you can't, the courts or the legislature can't go back and kill a lawsuit that's progressing through the courts. The lawsuit, though, is in federal court now. That's another complexity. It was filed in state court. The oil companies got it moved into federal court. And so there will be a federal judge weighing in, perhaps on the constitutionality of the state law and on many, many other questions involved here. The bottom line is that even, I talked to one new Bobby Jindal appointee last week on the board, someone who voted one time to kill the lawsuit. I asked him, well, how much is this weighing on? He says very heavily. He actually raised the possibility he will not vote to kill the lawsuit now. Another general appointee said, yeah, he's sticking to his guns. He thinks it's a bad policy. It's attacking a vital industry. But no one's quite sure what the board would do to try and regain the money if they voted to kill the lawsuit and cost themselves easily $5 to $10 million now and a price tag that's growing.
And a price tag that's growing. So for all of these different court actions, either the actual court appearances or anything preparing for it, the lawyers are billing for this?
Absolutely, yes. And all the research and all the defense of the law, or the fighting of the law that's designed to kill the bill. Another interesting thing is the legislature's law, if it were to be held constitutional and kill the lawsuit, supposedly that would still mean that the board would have to come up with the money to pay the lawyers' bills.
Which are mounting.
Which are mounting.
In the millions already.
Very much so.
All right, Kevin, thanks a lot. Don, over to you and mental health initiatives in the city post-Katrina. How are we looking?
Well, post-Katrina, we've had a lot of problems that in larger numbers than other cities have. Mental health experts say we see a whole lot more PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, here than in other cities, both because of Katrina and the BP oil spill. Also, a lot of victims of sexual crime with mental health problems. And the third biggest problem probably is the homeless population, many of whom have mental health issues. The city still is far short of overnight beds and care for people who need overnight stays, but there are some really unique programs going on in the city. The Metropolitan Human Services District was created after Katrina. And this is a state-created agency that funds and pools together all of the mental health resources within the city so someone can be assessed and sent to the right place at the right time, instead of before Katrina, where all these agencies didn't talk to each other and there wasn't kind of a unique way to get people to the help they need. Another group that actually has unfortunately shrunk since Katrina because of grant funding drying up. There was a lot of money rolling into the city after Katrina that is no longer rolling in. But the Trinity Counseling and Training Center, which is an offshoot of Trinity Episcopal Church, but a separate 501c3, it's a ministry of the church, but it's a separate agency, is the only program of its kind in the city that sees people for no fee or a $5 fee and uses interns. It's a training ground for LSU, Tulane, Loyola, UNO, Our Lady of Holy Cross, the Baptist Theological Seminary, any master's program people in marriage family therapy, in social work, and in counseling can apply to be interns at the Trinity Counseling and Training Center and actually treat real patients and get their training and be providing a resource for the community. They have seen their budget go from $500,000 to about $250,000 in the post-Katrina grant dry-up, but they're seeing 70% of their patients have incomes below $20,000. They're seeing 35% of unemployed or retired people on this sliding fee scale, where they're seeing all sorts of problems. So they cannot, because they're located right next to a school, see people who are pedophiles or people who are active substance abusers. But they're really providing a training ground that doesn't exist elsewhere. They say, they had 2 slots open and 48 applicants at this time last year. And they don't take federal or state funding. So they're a unique service in the community. They hope, my segment's called Future Watch, they hope in the future to get more funding. Their dream is to create a bigger presence and a more outreach into the community. And, they saw last year 2,048 individuals at this one training center. They are seeing a lot, and one of the other problems that they say they're seeing a lot of that I hadn't heard as a problem in our community is kids having trouble with healthy development because they have single parents or dual career parents with some kind of absentee parenting causing some real problems for kids in our community, and a lot of kids with post-traumatic stress disorder from Katrina. It's not just an adult problem, it's also very much a children's problem. There are now more beds for overnight stays for children in our community than there were before Katrina, but not for grown-ups.
So 2 good sources to go to, Metropolitan Human Services District
and Trinity Counseling and Training Center.
All right, very good. Thanks a lot, Dawn. Okay, politics, heading down the last week now before the runoff. Errol, how are we looking in the Senate race?
Well, if you looked at it a few months ago and anticipated the runoff, I think most people would have thought that there'd be more noise in the runoff than there's been, and there hasn't really been that much. I think one reason is because it was decided on election night that the Republicans are going to have a majority, and so it is not this pivotal national election in terms of control. That's already been decided, and the fact that the Democrats have cut back some of the funding for the Mary Landrieu campaign in terms of television. So I think what you're going to see in the last week or so is a big barrage of television, but pretty much, by this point, the candidates have done what they can do. I mean, the people who have made up their minds have made up their minds. The important people who make endorsements have made their important endorsements at this point. So it's probably more a matter of getting the turnout out now. You see a big effort getting people to vote early. That's probably targeted largely at the black community, trying to get them to vote. The white vote that Mary Landrieu needs, they need to go after those who didn't vote in the primary and get them to vote. And so I think it's that kind of election right now. It's more of an organizational election. Certainly, it's never been much of an ideological campaign at all. There's been one issue, Obama, all right. But beyond that, it's just an organizational campaign. It's going to be mostly behind the scenes and then TV.
Are we hearing any kind of predictions about turnout?
No, and there's no reason to believe that it's going to be really high. There's going to be a lot of distractions. You're in the Christmas season, football season, and I just don't think, for all the reasons I mentioned, that by the time you get to election day, and in some places there's 2 congressional districts in the state where you have runoffs, and that could help the turnout, but neither of those runoffs seem to be that closely contested either. And so there may be some spots where you have a big local election going on. In Jefferson Parish and in parts of Orleans Parish, you have a public service commission race. That might bring some people out. But But no, there's nothing really just major on the ballot that I think is going to cause much excitement.
Yeah. Kevin, I think you've been looking into the congressional races. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, and again, there's nothing here. Everything here is kind of anticlimactic in terms of the congressional races. In the 5th District up in North Louisiana, which it includes a wide swath of northeastern Louisiana and down into the Florida parishes, the big drama there was in the November election when everyone wondered whether Vance McAllister, who had come from nowhere about a year ago to fill an unexpired term, would he be able to survive the scandal that ensued after the video surfaced showing him kissing a woman who was not his wife? And it turned out that he could not, and he finished 4th in that race. Now you've got a Democrat, Jamie Mayo, the longtime mayor of Monroe. He came in first, but with his 28%, the question is, will he be able to increase much of that in a pretty conservative district? Republican Dr. Ralph Abraham, active in Republican circles up there, hasn't held office before, but I think he would be the favorite. Down in the 6th District, of course, it was the return of Edwin Edwards. He was one prominent Democrat against a wide slate of Republicans. Republicans divided the vote. Edwin Edwards came in first with a 30%. The betting money is that he won't be able to increase that very much in a very Republican voting district, and that Garrett Graves will most likely be the winner on December 6th.
Edmund is starting television, I read, this weekend. I think he's going to start some television.
He is starting some television, but he's been outspent. He was able to capitalize strictly on name recognition, and support for Edwin Edwards runs very deep in that district. It just doesn't. It's just not nearly wide enough. I don't think anyone believes for him to prevail, but we'll see.
Is this the race that, as Errol referred to, would really sort of create a little bit bigger turnout? Is there pretty much interest there in the 6th District?
There's interest there, but again, I think Edwin Edwards got out the vote that he was going to get out.
Seems
also,
like such a foregone conclusion.
Yeah.
Also, people get upset when you talk about race, but you really can't really talk about politics without talking about race. In an upstate district, Mayo, who's the mayor of
Mayo's African American.
He's black, but he can help turn out that vote, which could help Mary Landrieu.
Yeah, there's some thought in both these districts that would be a help. Whether it's going to be enough of a help to get either of them in striking distance of an upset victory, or enough to help Mary Landrieu. Again, we're talking about a December 6th runoff, which is one reason years ago we got away from the open elections for a while, because complicated legal matters, but we could have the election decided in November instead of December. A December 6th runoff doesn't really help turn.
What really would have happened if the one congressman who has a district in which the lines were drawn to have a black majority is Cedric Richmond's district. Just politically, it's too bad he was elected in the primary, because had he not, his campaign could have helped to draw out a vote for Landrieu, but that's not going to be happening either.
That's not going to happen.
And so that's going to keep it quiet.
Meanwhile, you've got around that district, you've got that district that was gerrymandered. The 6th District a few years ago, there was a Democrat had a shot at winning it. That's the consensus now is that a Democrat is almost unelectable in the 6th District these days.
Okay, December 6th is the runoff statewide, and also for these congressional districts. Errol, time to be thankful.
Per tradition, we look at 5 things during the past year to be thankful. In ascending order. Number 5, no hurricanes. Not even close. Not even a big wind.
I totally agree with you on that one.
Not even
Very
heavy.
thankful.
Not even heavy rain. Nothing. No reason to send reporters to Grand Isle or anything like that. And so, just a very quiet and appreciative thing. So, number 4. This really makes me feel good, is just the revival along Ferret Street. And if you're not used to the phrase yet, get used to the phrase OCH, all right, which is Aretha Castle Haley. All the new generation New Orleanians are talking about going to OCH, in the area. But the revival along Aretha Castle Haley, the restaurants and the art places and all that.
And the
then
food
just kind of
beverage
revival.
museum is there now,
What?
and there's a restaurant in there. There's so much there.
Yeah, there's just a lot of activity, and it's just beginning. And then with the activity on Ferret, which has a huge restaurant scene, and usually once you get a restaurant scene, you start getting nightclubs and auxiliary things, and so those things. And both of them a few years ago were in serious trouble. Number 3, new mixed housing developments. We saw a little bit of this before Katrina, but just drive around town, like where the Magnolia housing projects used to be, or where the Iberville projects used to be, and look at the buildings that have replaced them now. And they're all mixed-use houses. They're really nice looking. They look like decent places for people to live.
With landscaping.
With landscaping, drive along Martin Luther King, you see these kind of houses, and then you see like a huge neutral ground spaces where people go out and party and have second lines, and so that's really a good urban experience there, and we're getting more of those kind of things. And
It's
so,
much less dense. You know, it's a much lighter look.
I think that's good. Now, there's going to be problems. We know in the long run, okay, there's been problems with River Gardens, but it's a huge step getting away from what we had. Number two, the housing complex rising. Somewhere out there,
Hospital complex.
The hospital complex rising. Somewhere out there, there's somebody saying, "Oh, it's going to fail." Well, maybe it will, but we don't know that yet. I mean, what we see now is what's happening, and we see the growth. And you drive along Tulane Avenue, see the buildings that are going up. Finally, they're getting to the Dixie Brewery, and they're doing that. What was really a blighted neighborhood is being transformed, and you can see it with the auxiliary activity going down as far as Bank Street. All the new businesses that are opening, restaurants and bars. There was a bar on Lower Tulane Avenue that for a long time ago was just a notorious bar there were a lot of crimes there, a lot of prostitution. Now it's an arts bar. Right?
It's just such a different look now going down Tulane and Canal. Let's get to number one
and
before
so
we run out of time.
Number one, I think overall school is improving. I know there are some people that can name a charter school that's not doing what they thought it would, but the overall picture is that I think people are optimistic about education in New Orleans, that things are improving. And first time I've experienced that.
I think that's just a wonderful list, particularly that no hurricanes, but all of them, and certainly schools improving. That's a very, very important thing for the community, and still, as you said, a lot of work to be done, but it's good to see schools improving on that list. All right, it is time now to look ahead. Errol.
On the ballot, if you live December 5th, if you live in Jefferson Parish, study before you go vote, because there are some charter amendments, 11 proposed charter amendments in Jefferson Parish. Four of them, a few of them are pretty simple, non-consequential. Some of them kind of important. So, but Jefferson Parish has a very lengthy ballot for the election, including those charter amendments.
All right, Errol, thanks. Kevin.
Of course, challenges to the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, continue. The Supreme Court is hearing another one. And here in New Orleans, the 5th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals on Tuesday will hear a Texas physician's challenge to the Affordable Care Act.
All right, Kevin, thank you. Don.
Besides being a unique training center, the Trinity Counseling and Training Center is also the final stop on the PRC's holiday home tour this year, the Preservation Resource Center, and it's got some unique history about World War II that's fun to hear about. So that's the weekend of December 13th and 14th on the holiday home tour.
Thanks, Don. Gordon.
I'm going to be an optimist here and say the Saints are going to go 3-2 for the rest of the season and win the division at 7-9. So,
boy, you are an
extend
optimist.
the misery a little bit longer.
Which is
Just
an
like
embarrassing,
Seattle last
which is
year.
an embarrassing record to win a division with.
Seattle
but
did
nonetheless, yeah.
But it's still nice to be leading, but we want to be winning too. Gordon will be looking for this great series that's coming up starting this Sunday in the New Orleans Advocate. Thanks you guys for being here. Thank you all for joining us, and of course we want to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.